Okay. I'll try that again. Looks like our output is okay, but gotta say this every time now. This is just going over a Harvard course called Organizing People, Power, and Change, since I needed to do research anyways. Um, but it's this one, or it's far, by Marshall Ganz, and the point is that basically this information isn't very accessible. People that are involved in activism and politics, organizing campaigns don't really share this info publicly. That keeps us from basically having the scientific method, the benefits of, and I feel like we're well past the point at which we need to get serious about um, organizing at scale, or wrapping it all up, getting more folks involved, because a lot of assumptions about dedicating your life or you needing this experience, and that's just absolutely not true. So the point is kind of to define organizing, and for me, honestly, my my one definition, manager, is that, or example, is that an activist might go to a rally, especially speak at a rally. Um, that's totally fair consideration. And organizing or an organizer are like the people that set up the rally, that planned it, that built a coalition, hosted the meetings, did the media plan to get coverage, you know, outreach to bring people there, confirmations, all that stuff. It's very can be very technical, but it can also be like super exciting. It can be incredibly fulfilling, I think, more than anything. And my big um, kind of pitch metaphor is that if your house is on fire, that's going to be stressful. Um, House on fire is always stressful, but there are different levels. So if you are well versed in like a plan, a fire plan, you got the kids' heads, whatever out, important documents, you had a go bag or whatever it was, you're prepared, you're hands on in fixing the situation, calling the right authorities, alerting the neighbors, limiting the damage. Your house being on fire and watching it burn down in front of you is going to be stressful, but that is infinitely less stressful than standing there watching it burn down, not knowing what to do, not knowing what can be done, and a sense of helplessness more than anything. So that's why this stuff is important. By getting involved and hands-on really helps, and there are a lot of assumptions about the amount of time that people need to put in, and education, and degree of political science, and all this bullshit that's not true. Um, and so, yeah, the point of this is basically to make that information more accessible, and it so happens that there's a course at Harvard about this stuff. I don't think it's like the pinnacle of like the info, but it has a lot of good sources, really. And the teacher is pretty great too. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that, gosh, I practiced this a bunch of times, so I can condense down the information. Basically, just trying to like write a post, make a video. If you look this up on YouTube, there really aren't videos. And if you know any good organizations that fight for justice, like Sunrise or Working Families Party, a bunch of other ones that are for popular democracy, check out their YouTube channels. It's like a dozen views. It's literally like up to a few hundred at best. So this stuff isn't disseminated very well. I'm not good at video editing or any of that kind of stuff, but I do yap. So, and I do read a decent amounts or have read. Like to check in and stay frosty, as they say in Call of Duty 4. First games I obsessed over. There we go. So this is the first week. I probably should make it bigger. Um, Organizing people, power, change. There's a lot of honestly like a scary amount of information about of like recommended readings and stuff. Um, and I love how there's a little note like, do not be overwhelmed by the number of foundational readings, most of which are quite short. Um, and this is not even the first week. Like this is week one, and like this is his like 2021 or 2018 syllabus. Um, and in the first week, there's like obviously the Bible, Martin Luther King Jr. Um, I've yet to know what this is. I need to check it out. But he defines stuff like every week and kind of gives the most basic summary, which I think is super dope, like answering the questions in advance. Um, and then these are all the readings for the first, not even the first week, but the first like class, two classes a week. And one of them is literally just like a little table chart thing. And this is like the, oh wow, they put a space in here for no reason. This is like the goated best everyone loves Jane McAlvey, who passed away like a year or two ago. Um, and No Shortcuts from 2016, 2018 had a second edition, which had some really great, uh, I don't know, like taking into account what happened with our presidential election that year. And if you don't know who Marshall Ganz is, let me grab off my books that I can show off. If you don't know who Marshall Ganz is, um, he like dropped out of college for the civil rights movement, and I think it's Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, but they did a voter registration drive. I think it was called Vote Freedom Summer in Mississippi in like 1964. And yeah, he had a lot of hands-on experience, and then he went back to Harvard and eventually started teaching about this. He also spent like 30 years with the United Farm Workers in California. If you've ever heard the name Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, um, he kind of helped train and build up that organization, that union of migrant laborers that painstakingly go out to the fields and pick the foods that we are reliant on, but which get mistreated because big agriculture, mega corporations, super entitled people that run the farms. And I spent like 6 months there on like a totally random thing, but I got to experience some of that. Um, and short story, I went to a water quality like state board thing, and this is in a very rights like heavily conservative, big business run area of California, Kern County. Um, it's the highest agricultural production, highest oil production, like in the 48 states. It's called continental U.S., but basically they were talking about how they're going to divvy up the water that comes, I think, from the Colorado River, and the farmers got to zoom in uh, before the pandemic. They got to video chat in while everyone else had to like squeeze into this little room. Um, and I remember the advocates bringing up some like really basic things about, oh, how can we, improve? How can we have like clean water? How can we, have these standards be upheld? Like this is already like the law. How can we make sure that we're doing right by our people? Um, and then the farmers reacting with like, I didn't know it was it was cool. Or I didn't know people wanted to hate on farmers. Like I didn't wanted to hate on people that grow our food. Just this super like self-victimizing bullshit that I was stunned by. But in doing some research on the history of farm workers, that's the fucking norm. They're so entitled, so abusive. Um, there's a great story or book with, I guess both, with Fred Ross Sr., who, I don't know, I think he like recruited Cesar Chavez, but he started in like the Dust Bowl era, which I forget when that is, maybe like 1930s, but like super poverty. People moved from Oklahoma to California because of, you know, dust and like storms ruining their farms. And they were, you know, day laborers, not day laborers because they don't change sites every day, but they were farm workers. They were white farm workers, super poor, living in like tent camps, and had like these state administered managers. Fred signed up to be one because he thought it would, help people. He grew up in a nice family like in LA, but had a really rough experience with people trying to better their own lives and how they could stand up to the corporations that were abusing them. And yeah, he I think eventually was responsible for basically organizing a significant portion of LA, like bringing together all the different communities, different ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and that resulted in Chicago, not Chicago, but Community Service Organization, CSO, uh, which I don't even know what they're up to now. But yeah, that was Fred Ross. I gotta find my mouse hand pad thing so I don't give myself arthritis. But the point is, Fred Ross uh, was like had a biography that was something social arsonist, America's social arsonist. I've got it over there, but it's like super messed up. The cover did yet, but he's got a lot of axioms. It's pretty famous. Yeah, Gans and Fred Ross are two kind of like the historical folks that taught organizing and just knew a lot. Were very hands-on about it. Um, and yeah, that's kind of where we're starting. But one of the commonalities is they kind of both hated service organizations because the point is that if you go out to help poor people, like in a state-administered organization or a nonprofit, you're alleviating the symptoms without actually solving the root causes of the problems. And that can like placate people, make them dependent, even though that's like a very much right-wing talking points about people becoming dependents. Like it does happen normally um, when you like fight for something or have to work hard for something, and then you get a large amount of it for free. It can kind of ruin your capacity, your power, or whether it's an organization or a person, it disrupts like the habits, the muscle growth that happens from having to, like if you were to walk to work every day, or even run to work every day, or bike, whatever. If you do that for years, you grow up muscle. And if you start getting a car ride for like 3 months straight, your muscle deteriorates. So this happens like individual, local, larger scales. And right now it's happening with all the abuses and abducting that's going on with immigration enforcement is that communities are under attack, and when that happens, they come together to fight back, and they develop stronger networks. They work together even with people that they hate, and that is one of my favorite like consistent lessons or themes that you just see. Um, Especially there's this guy Charles Tilley, probably write this down, but he said, famous quote, "War made the state, and the state made war." And his point was, you can form countries, or that countries are really formed when they have to defend themselves. Because if you imagine, you know, when your people are under threat, they're more willing to give up more tax money, pay more tax money. They're willing to accept lower wages. They're willing to tax corporations and wealthy people at higher rates because if they lose, everyone dies, quote unquote. But like, terrible things happen. It's an existential threat. And so people like to quote, we had high taxes in the 1950s, and that was literally because of the situation that we were in. It was, uh, float or sink. It was an emergency. I'd like to bring that up that when we're under attack, we are able to marshal resources at a scale that we never really see. And afterwards, you're basically building up this extractive capacity. You're able to get more resources, basically building up bureaucracy, Weberian, like Max Weber, I guess German, professionalized bureaucracy that doesn't really have corruption. It's very meritocratic, that like judges people and its workers, and is structured not by nepotism, favors, or whatever else. It's structured like around the people that can do the work because it's so important. And if you build up a important enough, capable enough bureaucracy, that essentially, especially when it comes to taxes, that essentially gives you the ability to track people because that's part of what it does with getting taxes, income taxes, and making sure people pay. And then that necessarily means you have to be able to punish people who don't pay. All that paperwork and tracking and stuff is like administrative power. And once you have a state, in terms of state, like a country, that builds that capacity, that builds up the military as well, then you're kind of, after the war, you're left with so much power that you start eyeing your neighbors or like conflicts that you can get involved in because you've already built up so much muscle. It's like, why not use it? And sadly, that like leads to unnecessary involvement in foreign wars. So that's a common theme that I just see so much, and it relates to activism and organizing. Very long tangent, but I'm trying to sort of see where that comes in here, and I will put that down here somewhere. This is another definition of organizing. It's basically making it so decision makers can't ignore the problems the communities that they manage or rule over or whatever govern face. And one other proof of this, or example, I guess, is something that we call rentier economies, um, like rents, like people pay for housing. Of This is like the most focused on, but it happens a lot in Africa. But it's basically when a country has a lot of natural resources, it's a lot of free wealth that, quote unquote, like you didn't work for as hard because it was just naturally more available. And when a country has massive oil deposits or whatever, they're like, all the data, all the research shows that they're more likely to struggle in certain areas because they're given a large amount of resource and power for free, and that doesn't just mean that they become like lazy or whatever. It also means that they're invaded and that there's corruption and stuff. So that happens in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, where they're so reliant on like this one resource that they're able to advance their country's technology and everything else super fast so that they don't go through the necessary stages as much of bettering their own governance system. And one example is South Korea, that had like a very vibrant textile industry in like the 1950s or whatever. And that, because of the that was something that I guess they were good at, or whatever. They had a lot of workers in that industry, and those workers, like many across the world around that time, 75 years ago, were abused and exploited, and that led to South Korean women that were working in these factories organizing themselves, building organizations, building a union that represented them, that demanded better conditions, not losing fingers and stuff in their work. I think is a pretty basic ask, to not be maimed in your workplace. And that union push resulted in the country becoming stronger because they were not just pushing for working conditions. Of course, eventually they built up the power to represent themselves, that outside of work, they also clearly deserve the right to vote. So countries that have a lot of natural resources more freely available to them have this kind of curse where they don't develop the organizational muscle that's really needed. And that doesn't like necessarily ruin a country or anything. It just creates some unique problems, and it kind of defines the country as unique. I actually forget the name of this academic in like the study, but I think it was like Henderson 2010 or something. But she did a huge data like regression analysis, coefficient something, on countries and like indicators of state capacity, and was able to like basically throw all the data into an analysis that sort of categorized it for us, and it showed really two to three main types of countries, and it was like a lot of standard ones that became industrialized and all that kind of stuff, democratized, because When we build industry, people are brought together in dense cities, and then when they're brought together, they realize that they collectively struggle. They fight for better conditions, and then by fighting and winning that, because it is like an existential threat, people die, they get sick, whatever. Um, because of trying to live a fair life, uh, they start fighting for better conditions for the people around them and for better neighborhoods and the right to vote and all that good stuff. But countries that have a lot of natural resources balloon in certain areas, like Egypt and Saudi Arabia have these, or at least used to 10 years ago, have massive public bureaucracies. Like people complain about how big it is in the United States. It is like, I guess, the largest employer, the federal government. But there was like a promise in Egypt where if you graduated college, you're like guaranteed a job, and just finding things for people to do kind of became a struggle, and it like was even more recently a struggle in Saudi Arabia. So it creates these unique problems, and we face the same thing in organizations and activism with nonprofits, where right now the it's the grant money. It's like billionaires donating for charity because they get a tax write-off, or they want to feel good about their wealth or feel less bad about it coming from typically exploited sources. Will donate or have a foundation that then donates by creating grants that organizations apply for to get money, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. And by getting that influx of money, by just writing a short essay, answering questions, it can make an organization, not that it's always bad or anything, but it can make an organization kind of dependent on that, and start tailoring their activity to look good for grant applications more than they are trying to win on whatever issue they were found around. Especially climate and environmental justice organizations see this a lot, where they need to look good for the grant applications and their funders and philanthropists, because if they don't, the organization, like, people lose their jobs. And if the people whose jobs might be lost are making the decisions for the organization, they're going to choose to make sure that their lives continue, because they might have kids, they need to pay for food that's existential to them, and that leads to, again, lopsided capacity, kind of sometimes hiring too many people. But it's very different from organizations, especially community organizations, that are built off of fundraising from its member itself. And one group that does this, or a network of groups, is DART, Direct Action Resource Training Center, which is a faith-based organizing work. Like they organize churches and like the congregations of churches that come together and fight for whatever causes, because obviously religious virtues and stuff kind of push some of the members to do that. Not that it's always upheld, but uh, they're an example of a group that basically like won't take grant money because they know it's going to start screwing up their capacity. It's like someone that runs to or bikes to work every day, um, gets offered that ride in a car for like the next few months and realizes, oh, hey, that's going to make my muscles a little bit too weak. So I'm going to deny that, and I'm going to put in the hard work, even if it takes some more time. Uh, so yeah, these are issues that are ongoing, like basically eternal. Um, I haven't really seen people talk about just how consistent that issue is. So I wanted to go back over the literature, the research, summarize it, make sure that um, my definitions in writing are like well sourced, and that this information is accessible, and then um, also see if anyone's sort of brought up these issues. Because it last part, it happens with World Bank grants where they try to solve poverty in like a developing or low income country. So like an international group will fund a grant, and they'll want it to be community based. And these are called like community based poverty interventions. But there's an issue that happens when you try to give money to folks that are struggling for like the most basic needs, and you want the locals to lead it, which is very important and like should be done regardless. But there's an issue where if you have like European staffers for the World Bank go into like Yemen and rural Yemen, and they're trying to set up an organization for locals to manage their water supply because there's an issue where they do have like low water resources. They don't even have rivers there, like consistent rivers. That if everyone uses water freely, like as they want, it drains too quickly, the aquifer, and that leads to people having to pay tens of, well, in the United States, tens of thousands of dollars to dig deeper wells. And of course, the wealthier farmers are going to be more willing to pay for that and use more money. So it's really better for everyone if we coordinate and like collectively decide how to manage water. But when you set that up, you come in with like international money and you're looking for locals to lead, the people that come up to you and can speak English that have free time to donate these efforts are probably going to be folks that are more well off, that um, are what we call elites. And by them being more involved than others, it they basically can direct some of the money towards areas that help themselves. They can place the wells, like a community well, closer to their and like their allies and friends' houses, and that can, negatively impact the more impoverished folks who struggle because now they, even if they have a well that's closer than whatever walking to go. This is like more way back many decades of development, where people have to walk a mile or whatever just to get enough water for the day, and that keeps a country or a community from you know growing because everyone is just is focused on survival. Um, yeah, it can lead to problems or inequality within the community, even if people are slightly better off moving forward, and inequality, even if like whatever Margaret Thatcher said with uh, a rising tide lifts all boats, inequality itself causes problems, especially inter-ethnic inequality, because people can look different, and that causes division. Division leads to social problems, cultural. Of course, it's economic by definition, but it can lead to like increased crime rates and other just random issues, and eventually conflict. It actually can lead to wars. So these are constant. These are like basically the issues that humanity faces that we have to get over, and we definitely have to get over it within our activist communities. That's why a lot of groups, the really great ones, will be member led. They're not run by staff, they're run by the people that are basically like represented. They're run by community members, regular working people who like a normal job or whatever, maybe retired or whatever it is. Um, and that keeps the organization focused on things that really matter, and it makes winning improvements critical, because if you don't win improvements, like if people are joining an activist group because they want to take action because like this issue matters to them in an ideological sense, that's very different from people taking action because fuck you, I won't let you ruin my water supply. And so when it's more ideological, or what we kind of call issue based, sometimes performative, um, it keeps regular people from being involved because they don't see why their participation matters. And especially when the staff, like nonprofit staff, are making the decisions, that ends up, I don't know, creating a culture that people are joining and participating, and being seen as like seat fillers, or really to get enough people to take a good photo. Then that is kind of using people. It's very transactional. And then the culture ends up leaning towards and being dominated by people that have all that free time, even here in the United States. That's why currently the No Kings movement, 5051, and the pushback against our current administration, why you'll see a rally and you'll just see a lot of like older folks, and you'll see folks that are more well off or just from more privileged backgrounds, Not that it's like a universal truth or anything, but it's just like the data is skewed, or are skewed, whatever. And my cat is very needy, but yeah, these are things that we have to deal with, and knowing why it happens, and that it's not something that is like just by coincidence. And I think it helps us understand that it can be fixed, that we can uh, commit to the best practices, that we can be more intentional, uh, be more structured, and that not not that requires us to put in more effort because it does at the beginning, but it can lower the amount of effort that we need to put in over time because we have more people involved, more people step up, and people's level of involvement increases. So these are all like the issues that we face, pretty much all of them, in activism, organizing, fighting for justice, campaigns. They're all solvable. Like everything really is nearly everything um, can be managed by human cooperation. That's why we evolved as a species, is our ability to coordinate, which not that many not that many organisms have, um, especially or specifically within more intelligent life. But that can also lead to people abusing the coordination to get rich and whatever. That's a long tangent, but 30 minutes of tangents. Uh, let's see. Let me write down those notes. Very desperate. I'm popping up. Frontier economies. We have grant-seeking behavior, all in organizations. Let's say that falls under frontier economies. We have it's not just elite domination, it's of decision making and resources and capture of resources. This was more of like a complaint 20 years ago, 30 years ago. One of the professors that I studied under uh, was really specialized on, and I thought it was fascinating because it was like not a fad, but it was like a new innovation that we should really make sure these World Bank poverty interventions are run by locals, that people consent to it, and that we're not screwing them over, because there's some, I don't know, a lot of bad things happen when we don't listen to local people get their consent. Sometimes it's like hilariously bad. Oh God, I have to like look it up. Um, and I already threw away that browser. Let me see if I can find it. Um, water wheel, Africa, well, but mistake. Um, there was one like well system that people tried to make in Africa that basically they made this well and this pump system. They had a bright idea of like, oh, why don't we make it out of a playground so that like kids that are on the merry-go-round or whatever the thing is called, why do we make it so that kids playing brings up the water because they're already they're using energy. And it was just like the execution was bad, especially they didn't, there was an idea that they came up with without even considering locals, and made a bunch of them, and then almost all of them broke down very quickly. And then ones that didn't break down resulted in adults having to like play on a playground to survive, which is kind of fucked up because they even had like bright colors and stuff. Mistake, poverty, prevention, water. Just, gosh, I forgot what it's called. Oh, I should probably put playground. I think this is it. I mean, this might be a different one. Yeah, 2008. Playground water pump. I mean, good news. This is also a whole thing that happens where there's like a whole industry based off of people, not just like the fighting for justice, but like good news and this kind of stuff that creates a financial incentive to like do something for the sake of having done it rather than actually making an impact. Playground, what was it? I feel bad because this one was made by U.S. kids, or maybe they just did the money raising. Playground water pump merry-go-round. Water pump go round. Play pumps. What went wrong? It's in the title. I gotta save this. Yeah, it was like this merry-go-round thing. At least that was a beautiful theory, a theory which captured not only the attention of the World Bank, awarded the idea of 2000, and then Laura Bush, uh, oh God, I guess got behind it or something. $10 million, 60 million, 10 million directly from the U.S. government. Good Lord, what could go wrong? Even with the best intentions, copious background research, and it's never easy. This is why we research this stuff when it comes to trying to alleviate poverty and low-income countries. I feel like the term changes like every decade because developing can be like a thing where like, oh, if we build enough skyscrapers, that makes people better, but some communities can like live well off and basically keep their traditions and solve the urgent problems of like child mortality and that kind of stuff without needing to use a bunch of concrete and energy and stuff. And of course, third world, that term was it's like a Cold War era term where basically first world is like the United States and Western allies. Second world is like Soviet Union and their allies. Third world are non-aligned countries that weren't involved or like not important enough to be involved. The third world isn't even really a. It's just such like a weird term. Oh yeah, children have to play nonstop for 20 hours, 24 hours every day. The Guardian calculated that theoretically provide bare minimum for about 200 people on off of 2 hours of play. Yeah, um, because the people like needed the water, they needed like the investment, so they would kind of act like things were going well, and then like the village women would have to go in and do the labor. Lack of local ownership involvement. Yeah, let me. And case studies. New folder. Play pump. Poverty intervention. This is honestly probably the funniest. Um, Gone terribly wrong issue that like it's still like a very serious issue, but the concept of trying to make it and it's such the friendly and people even do this like on Reddit where they'll sponsor something they'll put like from our whatever anime cuties just really weird community names even like the atheist community and there's a few others will sponsor wells or water projects and sometimes it's just like not that because that's just kind of where it came from or who sponsored it. But when they have this like really creepy smiley stuff put on it, make it like look happier. It's just it's very looking down on the locals. I don't know. There's a word for it where not looking down on, but yeah. But the point is that we there's a lot of research that went into this, like the development, and it still went wrong. And there's research about why it went wrong, and we learned about it. But that stuff doesn't happen when it comes to activism and organizing. There is um, there is like some research here and there, but it's very infrequent. And there's a Prisms of the People is like one of the only. It's like case studies. It's qualitative and not quantitative, so they don't use like a big data set to like empirically prove or whatever, to, like show things that can be clearly replicable. No Shortcuts uses a lot of case studies with successful community organizations and stuff like that, and they really really seriously look at the the factors that went into winning. But Prisms of the People like actually had some like data in terms of like data sets and metrics and stuff. That's kind of one of the things that I obsess over is like how do we measure like what a good activist initiative is? Because it's not just activism; it can be campaigns, it can be electoral campaigns, like we run, every year, every other year in the United States. And the things that we use to measure are like so outdated at this point, like doors knocked and phone calls made. It's like people don't answer either of those things anymore, anywhere near the level they did 10 years ago. And even then, it was starting to become something that people would look at you uh, like you were going to rob them about. And so we like still have like, this is what our success is. We made 2 million phone calls. They just never talk about the contact rate, which should be uh, around 14% for knocking doors. If you're trying to like reach at least Democrats or whatever, it should be around 14%. So that's one way we tell when people are kind of like cheating the system and making it look like they did work. Um, it's like they'll have much higher contact rates, 50 whatever percent. Um, so the metrics we use can be asked backward, and one of my favorite things uh, is Goodhart's law. That's that a metric that becomes a target ceases to be a good metric. The point is, I think it's kind of related to the Cobra effect, which is literally referring to cobras in Mumbai, where I think it was the British government said, we got this snake problem, so let's pay people to bring in cobras that they caught. And so it created this whole industry of people breeding cobras in like their houses or whatever farms, and the problem got so much worse. But yeah, a metric that becomes a target seems to become a good metric because we're very cunning and strategic, and sometimes we can find ways to just make the number. We can cook the books. We can make the numbers look good and technically true without actually achieving anything. So there's plenty of ways to like basically effectively lie about the work that we're doing, and that happens all the time. Like if you need volunteers, you can tell someone. Sometimes there'll be like volunteer shifts recruited, and then you'll have folks who'll go out there. They'll meet someone that like seems friendly enough, so they're like, "Oh, uh, can you say that you were down to volunteer, but then just not show up? Because then I'll get credit for it." And like that happens. That happened in 2024. I've been told that by people who like, "Oh, I was told that I could just sign this, and I didn't actually have to do it." Um, and That's why we have accountability and like investigative mechanisms. There's like so many different forms of like structure that we have to deal with these problems, but uh, the point at which they were developed was like so long ago that we kind of recreate them without thinking about what we're achieving. One of my favorites is when you have a whole state and you're running a campaign, right, for get out the vote, and basically every night, and any good campaign would do this, where you have a checkout call, and around like 9 or 10 p.m., maybe it's 8:30, you'll have everyone in the state hop on a phone call. Sometimes it's a video call nowadays. They'll be like, okay, region A, how many doors did you knock? And they'll say like the doors knocked, the calls made, and of course everyone has goals like depending on their population. But your team then has to share their level of success in front of hundreds of people. and it's kind of like a public, not public because it's private, it's just the employees, public humiliation thing that is like relative, it's like ethically done, so everyone wants to avoid being embarrassed. Not that someone would make fun of them, but they don't want their reputation to go down inherently from bringing up how little work that they did. Um, so we have like these structures, but if we don't count the right numbers, which just pay attention to campaigns and efforts and how much they talk about phone calls made and doors knocked without talking about the actual contact rate, which has been plummeting since the pandemic. Uh, we don't take this stuff anywhere near as seriously as we do for poverty interventions because in these situations, the people that like USAID and nonprofits and advocates that like get the governments to fund this stuff because it does help our country, like maintains good relationships. They need to justify it, and there's critics who are like, "Well, we need to, solve our issues in the United States before we give money to other people." Uh, and so they have to be like very serious about like, oh, every dollar we put into this effort yields like this amount of money and positive benefits for us. Come on, baby. I know. And so yeah, by like there being a threat uh, to like their ability to continue this work, they get stronger at justifying it and get very serious about like the data, the research. But that doesn't really happen with activism, organizing, campaigns, and initiatives, especially given that some of the philanthropists, billionaire funded efforts and big foundations give out money. I don't want to say like candy because that trivializes it, but they really kind of give away money to be able to brag about how many things that they've funded. And it's like, why can't we just focus on what you actually achieved? Like that doesn't seem like it's a mean thing to ask. If you're spending millions of dollars, did you lift people out of poverty? How many people? If you want to feed people that are hungry, I don't think it's wrong to ask like, what is what is the food insecurity rate? That's the term we use. What is the food insecurity rate? The number of kids that go hungry in this community that was there when we started, and like how much did that change given that you hand out food every day or whatever every week? Like, does that matter? That we make a measurable impact, or is like doing it for the sake of doing it really worth it? Because charity, and this is for, especially for like the charitable stuff. Jane McAlvey would say, I'm just gonna religiously bring this up every time. She was a hard ass, like in the best way possible. She also taught at Harvard labor relations and was the chief negotiator for National Nurses United, which is one of the groups that endorsed Bernie and is like really fighting for justice and beyond bettering their working conditions. They'll back stuff like Medicare for all at the state level. Um, to just say, charity is about making the person that gives feel better more than it is about making an impact. And that's harsh and it's not always true. And she did admit like charity can sometimes be urgently needed. Like if there's a hurricane that destroyed a bunch of homes and people are like without power and like they're literally dying because of this issue, like it's not wrong to want to help them in that moment. But when it becomes a years and decades long thing that we do because we've already been doing it or that it makes us look good, it really is just a means of elevating our status. And that happens with the international poverty interventions. It happens with smaller scale and large scale charity here in the United States. Less so with the large scale because there is like the Charity Navigator website that reviews how much money you give actually goes to the people. But even then, it's like, do they consider what the long-term effect is on reducing food insecurity? So, yeah, it's not that charity is bad, but it holds so much potential for being bad. It's a tool like everything else, and it really only is an issue when it keeps us from solving the issue that we really need to. Like, you've got a hole in your wall in your house and cold air is getting in, you just on piling up cardboard over it. that helps in the moment and like it can keep someone from freezing to death, but that's not a long-term solution. And the people that focus on long-term solutions that the root causes of our problems, that's how we define what a radical is in terms of radical politics. It's focusing on the causes and the root, you know, where these issues spawn and why they happen when we want to solve them, instead of being so heavily focused on just dealing with the symptoms. But that is my rant for today. I get off of some of these unnecessary sites and actually do what I was meant to do. I hope I can transcript this to gotta learn that. But yeah, there's new stuff like this. This website came out, I guess, in the past 6 years. Um, but this is like specifically for researching this stuff. Journal by and for organizers. A lot of badass people, write articles here. Strategy and practice. And we do have some big things like this is this is 15 years old now. We do have this stuff, the organizing manual, which has these amazing, this is the 4th edition, 2010, these amazing worksheets that basically in one page will teach you how to fight for justice in a serious and structured way. Let's see. This is one that was like save our schools, I guess something with school defunding or passing a tax plan. But it goes into like the goals, the organizational considerations, the constituents, the people that you're mobilizing and working for, targets and tactics. This is probably going to be backwards, but it's all on one page. There's a version of it where the questions are laid out more clearly. That just has the examples. But basically, the good intentions are poison when they're not about survival or directly solving a problem that you're dealing with, because then you're out of touch. You're doing it for someone else without bringing them in to what, like the decision-making process and everything else. The pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. But yeah, that's 15 years old, and now I don't know if it's just too expensive to make. They haven't made another one. But the person that kind of was behind a lot of it, I think Heather Booth, is still active. I guess they run I don't want to say, a thing for senior citizens called Third Act, Third Stage of Your Life. Yeah, Kim Bobo, Jackie Kendall, and Steve Max. So Heather Booth did not make this, but those folks did. I gotta figure out what they're doing because this was made 2010 before people, before information became, universal, instantaneous, and like widely distributed. We've had cell phones. But I'm gonna come back, go through this real quick. Look, it's literally 2 pages. Check out this table, which this is a little bit slanted against advocacy, which is essentially lobbying. I guess it includes, lawsuits and stuff too. And like the distinction between advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing, because we call a lot of things we need to get organized. We're organizing, and it's often just mobilizing, which is amassing individual actions, whether it be votes, people to a rally, calls to their senator, or even like likes on social media. Because amassing individual action doesn't inherently mean that solve the problem, and that's the issue that we have with metrics with campaigns, is that we're just sort of maximizing this mobilizing number without thinking about the deeper structure of the relationships and our capacity to continue this stuff when we need it. And that's the issue with No Kings, is that if we come together every few months to go rally on a Saturday when it's convenient for us, do we have that capacity? Like the big numbers and stuff, can we do that at a moment's notice? And it's not a yes or no thing, it's a what degree can we recreate this? and they're actively trying to improve our ability to organize when we need to, and all that good stuff to connect to people doing the good work with people that are kind of just there for, I won't say the vibes, but to be a part of the moments and that kind of stuff and feel like they need to be out there, because those are two relatively separate communities, the people that would go to a protest and want to stand up, and the folks that are like day in, day out, whether it be full-time, part-time staffers, or even folks that are just deeply involved. And deeply involved can be a few hours a month. Like it really doesn't have to be that much. Those are kind of distinct. Um, there's still enough overlap that there's a lot of potential. Yeah, build space for rigorous analysis and collegial share. Helps us improve our practice. Try to just democratize within our fields. Many of us have seen the movie where non-organizers, VC elites, funders generate ideas and call on organizers to move people in service of their strategies, often undemocratically developed or simply wrong-headed. Literally, what happened with the PlayPump, was trained effectively in the methodology, but less on strategy development. Oh my God, yeah, it's such a like, oh, here's how we approach it, and like, well, now we have the ability to bring people together because of social media, like. But if we issue constant calls to action, people aren't going to trust what we're doing as much. So being intentional about what we do, making sure it maintains that status of like, you know, meaningful work, because we want to always make them, or the traditional thinking is like, want to make it as easy as possible, to fight for justice. You can do it while you're watching Netflix on the couch. Like that's not a way for someone to feel like they're really having they even if they're convincing themselves of it in the moment, told that it's important. Like they know in the back of their mind, maybe something I can do in 5 seconds on my phone isn't, you know, not that it's not revolutionary, but isn't having this massive impact in overcoming corporate greed and saving the world and like stopping, carbon emission or reducing carbon emissions and stopping the worst of the climate crisis, clean air and all that stuff, from a few clicks. Like, of course not. Yeah, not so many people focus on this, but there are some very good folks that do. Check out some of these. Uh, oh, nice. This is a very fair shot fired at Jacob, which is about like revolutionary politics and leftists, and it's kind of like, well, is a leftist someone that believes in workers having democratic control over their workplaces, or is it someone that makes that a reality? Can you, by thought, be a good person? Do the neurons in your brain firing change things for people that are struggling? Should someone that goes to sleep hungry thank you for being such a good person because you thought they deserved better, or because you did something about it? That you actually materially improved their condition and helps, whether it be through that emergency aid, that charity that is needed, or if it's joining up with them, solidarity, when they demand better from their elected officials and decision makers that put them in that situation, that give them an unfair deal, whether it be from their government, whether it be at like a workplace, even renters and tenants with like a slumlord that allows them to basically, it doesn't uphold a contract that has people living with mold and stuff and doesn't solve the problems. They want to get rich without doing too much effort. But talking about how bad it is, we're so good at that. It's so easy to say, oh, we need a revolution, we need to stand up, fight, get organized, this and that, and like it raises our status nowadays. Used to be made fun of this in like 2012, called everyone social justice warriors and feminazis and stuff. But now it's like the cool thing, badass, uh, for having the profile picture of them at a rally being like this. Um, and I think people are starting to wise up to the fact that like, oh hey, I shared 10,000 photos, but I still have a shitty job. Like, why aren't things better? Why do I still see state agents going out, picking people up, dragging them across the concrete and disappearing them? I either to a torture prison in El Salvador or a country they might not have come from, or a country they might not even know will come here as kids without their own consent. That's what we call dreamers, what this post here is about. Protecting the Dream Act, DACA. And we do need the strong vision. We do need the people to call for a better situation. We just can't placate ourselves with expression. The symbols don't really carve out better lives. We've kind of been made into 2D, plastered on cars and t-shirts and screens that are being used with like our hands and like the sweat that goes behind it. All of that stuff is what makes it more meaningful. Being able to enjoy like the meal from foods that help sow, like that will always taste better. We have a lot to share with academics, we sure do. And a lot of us are not able to because, not that it's a non-disclosure agreement, but they'll just straight up not have a career if you talk too much. And I've stopped caring about that. Yeah, we have a lot to learn to study this stuff too, the academics. I love how we call people badass. I do wonder if my Twitch thing is still using the Silk Song. Take this, actually read the freaking thing I meant to read. Let's set this up. Yeah, one of the issues we have are, sorry, it's gonna be crackly. I probably shouldn't be chewing gum, but we have this terrible set of things happening. We've perfected the art of concentrating it and sharing it to everyone so that all of the worst things are seen by a large amount of people. And that skews our worldview compared to, let's imagine if you never went on social media, never watched videos, and you only judge the state of the world by what you saw in your real life, what you could, basically what you could like physically touch, that you can evaluate, that you can see. We learned in 2017, the world still goes on. Like no matter how bad things are, people still go to work, the rain still falls, summer gets hot, winter gets cold. That is starting to change a little bit, but or get a little bit wobbly. Not that it goes in one direction, it gets warmer and that's it. It just gets more chaotic. It will get much, much colder in certain areas like Europe after the ocean currents when they die off, whether it be 100 years or 1,000. Make sure this is zoomed in enough. Close, or not close this, but make it smaller. Too small. Play it with that. My notes over. Just a little bit bigger. Like this stuff is hard to read with the 3 columns, but whatever. want to save the title too. Yeah, like there is some truth to like, oh, our economic system and ability to make things really cheap and like trade across nations and facilitating all that kind of stuff lifts people out of poverty. There's definitely like some truth to that, but it also placates us. Um, and it's not the only solution, nor is it the thing that is the only cause. It's ultimately just a form of coordination. The more we coordinate, the more people we involve in the decisions, as long as we're like sure that they're real people and not bots, more democratic our society, our systems become. Yeah, this probably define that social enterprise. I really hate the social problem, social change, because we define things as like cultural, social, economic, political, legal, or judicial, and social like seems to be rooted in like actual socialization, people talking to each other, interactions in day-to-day life, which pervade all the other systems. But these problems are like are not we can't solve racism and like everything else gets fixed. It's not a prejudice thing alone. Like that can be used and can like be a multiplier essentially, but it's not a everyone just treat each other the same, things will be better. Well, you can you can have people that screw over their own folks. There's a phrase of like not all skin folk are kinfolk, which is like just because someone is also a person of color, like they're not inherently free from the capacity to exploit others. And yeah, there's been this weird perversion of the civil rights movement as like a we solved racism and now like the problems are gone. The not just civil rights movement, yeah, I guess like the longer civil rights movement, like it's a labor movement more than it is like a anti-racism thing because people were enslaved, exploited like at a scale we've never seen before. It was W.E. Du Bois said the world's greatest theft of labor, stealing wealth. So no, even if people stop being racist, like we're not done. Things aren't saved. Just kind of removes one of the factors and ways in which we divide ourselves and scapegoat. I already downloaded this, but I will try highlighting again. I feel like this is one of the words that we throw out there too much, or at least academics do, and like don't explain. And I feel like I don't want to say buzzword, but it's inaccessible, and people's brains turn off when you say it because they're like it's like if you're saying settler, colonial, heteronormative, whatever. Like it, people that work 60 hours a week don't have time for that. They need to hear, you know, these are like the colonizers or the, oh God, this would be a better word for that, but um, the rich, the rich and powerful specifically. It has to be both. The rich and powerful mainstream. That's basically what that means. And we say neoliberal ideology, and it's like, well, I thought liberal, was like a, light version of progressive that, isn't enough, and kind of, at least now, this is like the thing in the past 10 years, complain about liberals, but of course, liberal used to mean like, should mean whatever, like free market economics don't interfere, but um, it's used to refer to liberalism, which is kind of like solving racism and these other really horrible things. I don't actually know how it's defined, but neoliberal is more of a free market solutions, um, capitalism that, like we still want to solve racism and these things, but we want to do it through efficient means. And efficiency really like, ends up being a way that people enrich themselves in this situation because their greed will use their greed as for like a good cause. Well, if you don't have very strict structures to limit that stuff, it will always get out of hand, and people are good at making things they do look better than they are. Hmm. The difference between knowledge problems and power problems. There's only 2 pages. Always love to see it. Oh God, what the hell? For examples, yeah, public education. There wasn't always a right to go to school and like learn to read. My grandma only went to school till second grade. She really, as she said, she like struggles to um, the finer parts of language, both English and Spanish. Um, Even she saw like education as they teach you how to read so that you can sign the contract so they can exploit you. Like you need to know enough that you're useful to make money. And that's still kind of true, but like it also provides a way out of our situation when we have more capacity and inherently gain capacity slash power from knowledge, at least to some degree. We can put it to use. There isn't always great options for. Okay, let's see how many of these. Abolition. Slavery, partially done, it turned into prison system. Still totally allowed. Look, education, going backwards. We have private schools being funded by voucher programs in conservative states where they take money from our public school funding and then basically give it to private companies that run schools for more efficient, in more efficient ways. But it essentially enriches people, and there are some like good examples here and there, but ultimately it funds public schools, leads to poor results. Agrarian reform. Honestly, I'm not sure how they're defining this here, with farming, but whatever. Labor rights. We we got a lot of this from like I'm not sure if it's Taft-Hartley, but was it like Wagner Act, like 1935, our like rights to collectively bargain. And there's a book, The Future We Need. I think it's like Organizing for a Better Democracy in the 21st Century by Erica Smiley and Sarita Gupta from 2022. Erica is the head of Jobs with Justice. And Sarita, honestly, I haven't read her bio, but they I like how they incorporate like the international labor movements. We don't have to just fight for people, within a 20-minute radius of our workplace. Like we can have these international movements. But she brings up that like the way we organize unions and labor rights in the United States is it's driven by okay, cool, it's not showing up. Basically, the structure that was set up, the National Labor Relations Board, that it's like essentially formed around stopping strikes. It's like facilitating negotiation so that we don't shut down the economy, because that's the worst possible thing for profits and economic growth. So it did force public workers, people that work for the government, to not be able to strike, which is super fucked up. Like that you can say that this certain group of people can be exploited and they can't do anything about it. So they can't do anything really powerful about it, which is to stop working together. Strategic moments. Civil rights. Civil Rights Act knocked or shut down by the Supreme Court. Large provisions of it have already been null and void, which led to the current gerrymandering schemes going on. And John Roberts, the specialist under the Reagan administration, hell bent on removing, I think it's like provision 2, but it's like that saying that you shouldn't discriminate against communities of color and try to screw them over in your gerrymandering process, that like different ethnic backgrounds deserve representation in Congress. And he wants to get rid of that. He's like, no, you're not guaranteed. You shouldn't be guaranteed, even to a slight degree, representation. It's totally okay if we have a mwahaha, like all white wealthy government. Like, Jesus Christ, bro. Please. Just twirl your mustache. Women's rights. Obviously, the My Body, My Choice has been undermined. Losing Roe v. Wade and states automatically shutting down medical facilities that provided life-saving care. Environmental protection. Like we had the EPA, and there's this weird split in the environmental movement where basically like Sierra Club was created to allow wealthy men to go on hunting trips. That was the point, like don't ruin our hunting trips. And obviously the way we see it now is like we deserve clean air and clean water. That shouldn't be radical or revolutionary to say that we deserve to breathe and drink without being poisoned. And but yeah, so like the conservation part totally definitely succeeded in a large amount of places, because you can get people who are hunters, outdoorsmen, outdoors people, and get them behind stuff, because it also serves industry and business to be able to sell hunting gear and everything else. And there's like some really good inherent, rights with like you should be able to hunt and all the good stuff to provide for your family. You shouldn't be forced to buy everything from a grocery market or superstore. But yeah, the environmental movement has fallen short in a lot of places. Like we got the EPA in Trump's first term. They wanted to uh, take the EPA and cut its budget by like 30%, which is insane for like a major federal agency. That was largely stopped because it was giving out grant money, which again, like people really need, not just to save their own jobs or whatever, but like places who rely on that for building up stuff, so they will fight back for it. And even, conservative members of Congress would stand up for that stuff because the number one thing you need to do as a member of Congress is like bring back money to the district through grant programs. At least that's the like, I'm not so sure how hidden it is, but secret, uh, like they're thinking, bring back money to the district and grant programs and create jobs. Like those two. And so yeah, that flew against the face of like something that basically guaranteed their ability to still have the job and be elected. Do those two things, and then of course on the campaign side, raise money like constantly, every day, phone calling, begging people for money. Honestly, fuck that. So yeah, these successful social movements like might have been successful, but they kind of failed in a lot of places, or have been rolled back. And where they did succeed, it's often like reliance on strike power, the ability to withdraw participation, people not complying or giving their labor, the places that exploit them and rob them, treat them like shit. And the women's rights movement that was like included people, these marches, and I'm not sure if it was like burning shops down, but there was like some radical action out there. In addition to like social stuff, people um, withdrawing, not hooking up as much, not engaging in relationships um, with people who would deny them basic rights. Civil rights, big, big actions in the civil rights movement. Montgomery bus boycott. Like one thing people don't bring up is that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated when he was visiting. Was it Nashville or Memphis? He was visiting the city because the workers were striking. They like didn't go there to like stop racism and that's it. Like he went there because people were standing up for themselves and they like needed the support. And that was sanitation workers, like the garbage folks, people, garbage men back then. They were picking up the trash and they like were on strike, and so the trash wasn't picked up, which led to trash piling, which happened in Paris and France like a few years ago. And that's like a huge, they stop working and your life turns to shit very quickly. They use the leverage that they had because they relied on for something so important. Labor rights by default inherently. Apparently there was like May Day 1886 was a big strike day, 500,000, which I don't see why we don't just do that for No Kings, like have a commitment thing. I know folks don't want to sign up and have their name affiliated with whatever, but like having a clear number of the amount of people that are willing to stop working, seeing how much it affects the economy, because it really depends on how structured and strategic that is. Because if you have certain industries have workers strike and those industries shut down, and that leads to trucks and trains not delivering the food that people need, like that starts to really mess with people. But if it's like one person from each job site stops, like the job continues to be done. It's not as disruptive as we'd like. And that's why organizing is necessary, that we can't just mobilize people or can't just issue a call to action and hope that people show up. It has to be guaranteed. We have to build a network so that we can recreate that, because negotiations rely on the threat of being able to do this stuff again. That's what Hahn identified in Prisons of the People, that you need to build flexible independence of power, and that mobilizing, especially like large scale stuff, falls short because it's not replicable. You can't do it at a moment's notice. And when you can't do it at a moment's notice, elected officials inherently, like the path of least resistance is always going to be the preferred route. And that often is just ignoring people because temperatures die down, people lose energy, uh, and might protest really badass for like a day or whatever. But it's like, are they going to be here multiple times? Can they keep this up for weeks, months? Who else can they get involved? So it's a structure thing, it's a network thing, capacity, long-term power, not just what looks good in photos or sounds good in a headline or catches attention, even though that does produce positive benefits. The issue is when it begins to keep us from doing the work that needs to be done. It's kind of happening right now to a large degree. Like the work that really needs to be done are rapid response teams, community defense forces, which are essentially, just people on the lookout for immigration agents, being able to, from not the moment, but very soon after agents entering their community, making sure everyone knows and is alerted that they already know their rights, that someone is already on their way to go verify that there is indeed an agent at this place, blowing the whistle to alert people that can't be reached by text or social media posts, and then exercising constitutional rights, uh, and just other things like telling the neighbors, and they're able to demonstrate, and creating such a ruckus that even if it doesn't directly interfere with the job of the federal agents, which is illegal to do, to obstruct their work, that it just becomes like a hassle enough that they don't want to deal with it. And abolition, honestly, don't know much about the movement for public education. That's definitely worth do this. Oh my God, this is it. There are no heroes. Like it's not going to be a individual does the right thing in this one time and like that saves everyone. It's a storytelling thing. So, like it helps us with not just like TV shows, media, and books and stuff, but our own personal storytelling to be able to frame things in such clear ways that people can imagine themselves um, in those situations and see how it might relate to their life. But it's never going to be heroic individuals to solve these problems. And people kind of like latch on to symbols like, um, oh wow, my cat's name. Uh, Ahsoka, not Ashoka. Oh my God. Here we go again. Charter schools, voucher system. The purpose is do better. this is key here because like market discipline, because like it always rewards people to do things more efficiently. Also rewards people in like businesses that break the rules and can get away with it. Like the on bridge, it's line 3 or line 5 in Michigan, where they were trespassing on native land reservation, explicitly against not only the tribe saying like don't come here, and they do have sovereign authority. So like it would be like someone ignoring the federal government, a big business like not giving a shit. They were ignoring the state government, look like the courts there, as well as the governor ordering them to not trespass. This was more of like a driving through an area thing. Um, Ignoring all that, and it took until like the Biden Department of Justice stepped in and was like, "Oh, hey, this is like super illegal, and you really don't give a fuck, but uh, you can't keep on doing this." That it stopped. The market discipline, like with all the metrics and everything else, like there are ways to game the system to cheat or be disingenuous or otherwise sneakily not doing, not keeping integrity, playing fair, screwing over others. Much hyped, very academic. It's the thing I was talking about. Oh my god, the merry-go-rounds pump water. Oh my god, it's so hilarious. Oh my god, it's how is that so perfect of an example? They do cite government oh insufficiency, and they really rely on the conservatives trying to privatize essential services. We really rely on like assumptions and preconceptions about government bloat, even though these departments are funded and like reviewed and debated over endlessly, and sometimes there are things that are kind of funded too quickly just to get approval for some larger package to be put through. But it gets investigated over time because like that member might not exist or might not still be elected in a year and a half, or the district might be different. This stuff is constantly reviewed. Oh yeah, because they're not accountable to the people that are supposedly helped by these programs, locals that live around. I have no idea what these colors really mean. Oh, know how to solve these problems. What is missing is the political will. Hmm. It ruins the public voice because the frames our issues as needing more technical knowledge instead of power imbalance, which is where kind of all of our problems lie. People have more power than others. And economist Hirschman said, in a system undergoing change, Members members in exchange for loyalty for a purpose. The members can use their voice to affect the trajectory of the change. I feel like this is weirdly worded. I guess by the system they mean like a variety of systems. Like it can be an organization or whatever. Just like you can organize a system, whether it be an apartment complex, a workplace, your neighborhood council. So if your neighborhood council is changing dramatically or dealing with something, the neighbors can basically fight for what's right, help affect the way things go because they're inherently listened to by being part of the neighborhood, or they can dip out and find something else that's solving their problems, which would be like a better job. To afford, let's say, private security guard because there's burglaries in the neighborhood. And this happens with social enterprise where they want individuals and collectively everyone to exit government in favor of private corporations solving our problems. And if private corporations and business are going to solve our problems, the corporations don't have to listen to who elects them. There's no representative democracy and that kind of stuff. It should work better than it does. There's just, the board of directors or whatever decision making within the corporation that is focused inherently on profits above all else. And so if we're not solving our problems by getting people to speak out and convince their representative, which then builds community networks and relationships that could be used for other problems, other emergencies, long term down the line, all these other challenges we might come across. We're not innovating how to reach people. We are undermining people's commitment to local engagement. It's basically the same thing with the people defending their grant funding for stuff that they need. That gives them kind of like power and legitimacy, and they can all be activated in the future when something else challenges it. But if people don't have to fight for those grants, we become weaker. And if everything is solved by a corporation or whatever else, if we see something bad happening, we don't think like to call um, the relevant government or whatever else to get someone else's problem, someone else is going to deal with it. Basically abdicates us caring about a lot of things. When everyone, it's a bystander effect, basically. So this basically our problem's going to be solved when people fight for themselves. Age it has legitimacy because democracy, and when corporate interests try to take over our democracy, or at least um, what is it like funnel the resources their way. Better word for that, like colonize, but not that. Corporations, yeah, basically like take over social services, creates an opportunity to renew our democracy because people's voices are being pushed out, and when people are under attack, they push stand up, fight back. Like that's a not a jump, but like it's not as clearly connected because people are so checked out. It's almost like the default. They need to feel like something's being lost, um, and not feel or like ideologically agree with something being lost. They need to be like, oh wow, this door is not open to me. Now I have to go around. So we need to basically make tangible material that which we are losing. But if we lose that door and have to walk around, the people that close the door might sell us a very cheap, I don't want to say scooter, but like escalator moving, platform thing. And it's like, oh hey, it sucks that you're dealing with this now, but here's a cheap solution, which we also get money for to run, which then gets funneled into the pockets of the people that run it, the founders. And not just the founders. This is like the key part. The founders' great 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 grandchildren who might have never been in that area, who might live on the other side of the world, never lifted a finger to deal with these problems or do the work. They just inherently inherit this wealth. All right, how do we summarize this? Social enterprise, not social change, solving systemic social problems. Wow, alliteration. Takes people, politics, and power, not more social entrepreneurship. By Marshall Ganz, 2018. This is pointing out that privatizing our solutions, like private schools instead of public schools, because they're more efficient, but that inherently involves taking the resources that went to our public schools, giving them to corporations, and they're not responsible for what normal corporations do, like market forces, a mediating role. You have to, if the product crumbles every time you buy it before you get to use it, you're going to stop buying it. Like that is a real force in society. That doesn't happen when we privatize public services because what they need to do is not, they don't need to convince the consumers anymore. They just need to convince the government to give them the money. And they can convince the government by basically lying about how efficient they are and convincing the public to think the government is always so bad doing things. They really have spent eating okay millions, billions of dollars over time. Get us stop. Uh, I don't know why you're trying to go after an orange peel. Yeah. Okay. Um, Weird. There we go. Corporations don't need to send good products, they just need to sell a good message that the other things aren't working. The public schools, public services aren't working because government bad or inefficient. And the reason why government might be inefficient at doing things is because it inherently requires the consent of people, of the citizens, or it should, like, because the structure is to require the consent and approval. Depends on how representative it truly is of our concerns and beliefs. So these private companies privatize, they don't really have to sell a good product. People would stop buying it. They just have to sell a good message. It convince people. They can invest in that, like, collectively as a group, which is what a lot of conservatism or neoliberalism, whatever, is based on. The corporate interest. Constant message: the government is always bad. So they don't just sell the message in media. They sponsor foundations. They sponsor um, departments in schools, including at Harvard, Social Enterprise Initiative. Even I was just listening to NPR, you hear the same thing, like, oh, social solutions to whatever. What they're looking for is another business to take money that went to public service, government funded. Well, it's still going to be government funded, but something that is run by government officials and therefore like has standards and like can't violate your civil rights. They want it to be handled by a company that's innovative. It doesn't actually have to be innovative. It just has to like look innovative. People are really good at deception. This is an industry $1.6 billion funded since 2003. And all these major Harvard, what is it called? Ivy League schools. Social enterprise hasn't solved our problems that it claims to. They've gotten worse. It distracts us from how important it is for our government to be active in this stuff, but especially how important it is for citizens to demand better from the government. Because it offers itself as a solution founded on the idea that markets, not government, produce the best social and economic outcomes. It says that our problems are solved by having the right knowledge, not that we need to see our problems, social problems, as power problems, of which wealthy, connected people have more of. This technical innovation always looks better when it's this small scale little thing, because then you can really tailor it to, you can game the system more easily than 100 public schools. Having one that looks good, much easier. You can do it for a short term. Just to convince the government to divest from its own schools and give you the money instead. Maybe they donate to the people making decisions, campaign funds, through whatever means, convoluted. Dealing with social problems as power issues takes organized people and collective action that use the power of a democratic government to overcome resistance to change. Is always there because people are afraid of change. It's the unknown. Successful examples of this are things that have been really rolled back, but abolition, public education, labor rights, civil rights, women's rights, environmental protection, which have all either fallen short or failed because of abolition of slavery existed in prisons, public education at privatized schools, which is this article kind of uses as an example, but labor rights. Our National Labor Relations Board was made to prevent strikes, to negotiate, to avoid that at all costs, because it hurts the economy too much and profits. But it does give us like a voice, seat at the table, inherently. Oh, my poster's gonna fall. Civil Rights Act being rolled back. Even currently, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court hell bent on that, has been since he was appointed by Reagan, to say that basically people of color and marginalized communities don't deserve representation. It's totally cool and okay if like our government is all one particular ethnic group. Women's rights rolled back, Roe v. Wade being lost and medical centers being shut down now. People dying because they can't get the medical care they need. Environmental protection, which our enforcement of is defunded. Power of is being rolled back to interpret how the laws apply to different issues. This privatization services is incompatible with democracy, and that's clear in how they frame it. It's the heroic individuals as the key to social change. Even in their promo materials, they state, just as entrepreneurs change the face of business, social entrepreneurs act as the change agents for society, seizing opportunities others miss to improve systems, invent new approaches, create solutions, change society for the better. That's Ashoka. Be confused with Star Wars character. The best Star Wars. So it's incompatible, and they're clear about that. Or we can understand how incompatible it is by the way they frame and sell the message. Feel good stories. Second, they claim that business is the way to solve our problems because businesses are more flexible, efficient, and give more consumer choice. But these firms aren't competing under normal market forces where you can just stop buying something if it's terrible. They're competing for donors or investors on the promise that they'll do better solving the problem. They don't actually have to solve the problem, they just have to convince people that they do. Third, promoters seek to minimize government. John Whitehead, Goldman Sachs chairman, funded the institute at Harvard, was explicit. I'm always looking for opportunities to expand the nonprofit sector of our economy to have nonprofits take over functions that are now performed by the government. In the work of public schools, charter schools are an example of how the private sector can do it better. Nonprofits can do it better. Of course, social enterprise isn't always inherently bad. In every case, there's some positive impacts here and there, but its capacity to deal with our problems is woefully low. This approach turns over public policy and law, all the democratic decision making, in favor of private business, nonprofits, and handing over the decisions to corporations or even nonprofits. There's no or less democratic accountability. Nonprofits are run by staff. boards of directors, not elected representatives, the people that they're supposed to serve. This doesn't make sense when addressing truly systemic social problems like economic, racial, gender inequality, healthcare, education, criminal justice, things that have been simmering for a long time, system-wide, affects everyone. Feel-good stories we hear. With raising money or doing things a technically cool new way, have the problem of scaling up to millions. But they can sell the idea that they're better by focusing on small cases. If they sell the idea enough, they win. They don't actually have to solve the problem itself. Our entrepreneurial capitalism relies on market-based competition. So customers reward places that sell things for cheaper or better quality. That doesn't exist here. Even successful social entrepreneurial initiatives can't scale up. Effectively, scaling up usually requires government engagement that they hate. As a field, privatization hasn't scaled up from being successful, but by building a lot of political support, getting a lot of college students, graduates, talent behind its projects. They're popular, even without meaningful evidence. They're staggeringly little. They can create meaningful social change. Government solutions and impacts are tracked, identified, debated over through democratic means, subject to regulations, which these privatizations organizations don't have. They don't have transparency, disclosures, Freedom of Information Act requests. They don't even assess their success like normal nonprofits. Their assessment, impact reporting and investment standards, IRIS, and social return on investment, SROI, tools promoted by them are not based on rigorous research methods, scientific method. Although there are some affiliates of EMES, International Research Network, that have attempted to address these concerns. Fundamentally, the problems remain. In the absence of transparency, their failures go unreported, so they maintain a good status and perception among the public. There are two key failures that do receive attention. One, charter schools. They don't just suck and reduce educational inequality, but they increase it because they take away from our public schools. Second, famously, hilariously bad, the PlayPump, setting up wells, water pumps in Africa, rural villages, using children's merry-go-rounds in their play, pump the water because they're already using energy. Innovative ideas backed by a South African company that failed miserably. Poorly adapted, didn't get consent from locals. And 5 years after the project launch, PBS Frontline found that many were unused or broken. Their failures are ironic because they call government full of failures. They cite government failure, lack of accountability, efficiency as justification. Give them money instead. Developing countries is seeking to help dysfunctional governments with limited resources. Yet the efforts like PlayPumps are dependent on public funding, even though that local government should be solving the problem. Because if you rely on international funding, when it dries up, you're in trouble. So given their poor track record, why are they so popular? The rise is linked to dramatic renegotiation of private wealth and public power over the last 40 years. After World War II, since this view of democratic capitalism, but inequality could be only solved by equal voice among citizens, political voice. Democratic government's role is not a safety net for the unfortunate, but a publicly accountable institution that could advance the common good in domains such as education, healthcare, research, national defense is the only mechanism. Government is the only mechanism that can employ the rule of law to rein in the power of private wealth, because they have a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Since the 80s, the rich have succeeded in promoting the idea that government is inefficient and that private companies should take over our problems and services. They say the wealthy say we shouldn't fix our government. We should just hand the resources to companies. Minimizing government's role weakens the power of regular people, of civic society, and it lessens and undermines using public resources to solve public problems. Citizens become customers, and politics becomes a form of marketing. By privatizing stuff, you don't have to sell good products anymore. You just have to convince people that you do. When people aren't used to demanding better from their governments, they can be screwed over more easily. We know the solutions to our social problems. What's missing is the capacity to put them to work and the power. There's a global body of knowledge and research on how to reduce inequality, educate children, address climate change, improve our cities, and make decent healthcare affordable or available to all. What we're missing is the political will to restore these labor rights, school equality, and disincentivize carbon emissions, provide adequate housing, transit. Social enterprise fails to name, much less address these core problems. By framing these issues as lacking technical knowledge instead of power imbalances causing them, they convince people to stop caring about better government. By getting people to give up on better government, they strengthen themselves in the long term. They reject innovation on how to collectively use our voice, generate social power needed to redirect public institutions to do what they need to. They undermine people's commitment to political engagement on which our democracy is based. When people dip out, they get more powerful. Democracy is built on sustained interaction between people, electing officials, fight for their constituents, debate solutions, policies, compromise and pass law. Social enterprise redefines civil society, redefines politics, the space to create private institutions, that can solve all these problems without needing regular people's input. By framing those benefiting from these government programs, by treating them as clients or customers than citizens, they no longer have a right to have their voice heard. Go somewhere else, buy from another. When you're the only business around, it's not really a choice. Real change can only be achieved when citizens effectively use their voice. The wealthy corporate assault on our government creates an opportunity to renew our democracy if we can put aside these distractions like privatization or social enterprise, nonprofits dealing with our services instead of government. If we can put aside these distractions, step up, join our fellow citizens to do the educating, organizing, mobilizing that are needed to reclaim the power of public voice. That is what this article is about. Marshall Ganz, Tamara Kay, and Jason Spicer, 2018, Standford Social Innovation Review. Reading number 3, Organizing People, Power, and Change, first week, first class. That's 2 hours. Let me give it one more shot. Social enterprise is not social change. Social enterprise is not social change. 2018 article, Stanford Social Innovation Review. Tagline or subtitle, Solving Systemic Social Problems Takes People, Politics, and Power, Not More Social Entrepreneurship. This social enterprise or social entrepreneurship. Okay. Social enterprise and entrepreneurship. Business privatization inspired approach to solving public problems. Exploded in the past decade, entrenched itself in Ivy League colleges, urban planning economic development fields, health and education policy as well. Even Harvard has their own initiative. It actually hasn't solved our problems. A lot of these have gotten worse, and its rise distracts from and undermines the role of people's voice being important. It offers itself as like a market-based private alternative. Privatization, not with just corporations, but also nonprofits, which are also not accountable to elected officials or not accountable to citizens. They frame our problems as just needing more knowledge or technology instead of power. Many of our issues come from the wealth and power of certain folks. Dealing with power issues as power problems, political approach requires collective political action, takes people's voice, they see our problems as knowledge problems that can be solved by technological innovation, competition among social entrepreneurs, for-profit, nonprofit, or hybrid enterprises. Contrast what we normally see, political approach. We have social problems caused by power problems, exploitation, screwing over people that you can to get rich. Dealing with power problems requires collective political action, organize people and communities to stand up, fight back, using the power of government to overcome resistance, the change that is needed. Examples of this are abolition, public education, agrarian reform, labor rights, civil rights, women's rights, environmental protection, a lot of which is being rolled back. We can see how incompatible it is with democracy and the way they frame it, with heroic individuals as the key to social change. They even say it in their promo materials. Just as entrepreneurs change the face of business, social entrepreneurs act as change agents for society, seizing opportunities others miss to improve systems, invent new approaches, create solutions, change society for the better. Secondly, they assert their organizational form as the solution, as it offers flexibility, efficient services, consumer choice. However, those conditions happen because consumers, when they get a bad product, decide to not buy it anymore. The only school around you is a voucher, private school, charter school. You can't choose anything else because it would disadvantage your life driving an hour every day each way. So they don't need to compete for customers, they need to compete for investors, for private sector donors. Promises will do well. Third, promoters seek to minimize government at large. They're always looking for places to privatize or have nonprofits take over functions that are solved by government. It's not that they always fail or have never made any positive effects, but that their capacity to deal with our major social problems is inadequate. Their approach turns public policy domains, private sector organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, that replaces the democratic accountability comes with government services. It's not that they've never had positive effects, but that their capacity to deal with major problems, social problems, is inadequate. They turn public policy discussion over to private sector organizations or nonprofits, replacing democratic accountability with market discipline. But that makes little sense. That makes little sense when we're addressing system-wide problems. That doesn't make sense for system-wide problems. Economic, racial, gender inequality, healthcare, education, or criminal justice, because they can offer a solution based on a limited scenario that doesn't scale up. They can make something look really good for a short while, but doesn't work for everyone. Entrepreneurial capitalism relies on market-based competition, customers that reward them for their innovation with economic success. That reward system doesn't exist here. They can rarely scale up. Instead, they scale by building political support, by convincing people government is so bad. It's a default knee-jerk reaction nowadays because invade TV shows, movie, radio, their propaganda goes wide and far. They use college students, graduates, attract the best of us. These projects don't have evidence that they work, whereas government solutions are identified, tracked, investigated, debated over. Their organizations aren't subject to the regulations of transparency disclosures that we have in government services. There's no real evidence that they can do better. Their means of reviewing themselves doesn't hold up to science. There are some attempts to do better, but the problem still exists. Without this accountability comes with democracy. Their failures are not reported. There are two exceptions to this that get attention. First, charter schools, private schools, school vouchers, which have not only failed to reduce educational inequality, but have shown to increase it. Internationally, children's play pumps, where for wells, rural villages in Africa, the solution was to use children's playtime on a merry-go-round because they're already putting energy in. Why not harness that? Bring water up from the ground. Sounds good in theory, great intentions. In reality, it forced local women to go around these pumps instead of the kids. A lot of them broke down since they were specialized. There weren't really fixes, support within 5 years. Many were unused or broken, having already taken our resources. It's ironic because they say government is bad at solving our problems. And in developing countries, they seek to help growing governments with limited resources by using international money. They themselves rely on public funding, tax-exempt foundation grants, and other contracts. When the money runs out from international donors, those local governments are in trouble, so it's not sustainable. Given their failures, why are they still popular? That's a larger society-wide renegotiation between private wealth in public power over the last 40 years. After World War II, the idea was inequality of wealth could only be dealt with by equality of political voice. Government's role was not as a safety net for the unfortunate, but a publicly accountable institution that could advance the common good across things like education, healthcare, research, and national defense. Because it was the only mechanism that could employ the rule of law to rein in power of private wealth. Since the 80s, elites, the rich, have been successful privatizing much of government. Instead, frame government as the problem. In their view, efforts shouldn't focus on improving how government functions, but on replacing it with corporate solutions. In minimizing the government, we minimize ordinary citizens' political voice. Citizens become customers, and without constraints on spending, politics becomes a form of marketing. It makes it harder for us to demand better. That's what we have to do normally when government is solving or providing services. We actually know the solutions to all these problems. A lot of international research. We just don't have the capacity, the people power to make it happen. The political will isn't totally there, or it's being stifled. These social enterprise entrepreneurs, they don't even name or address these problems. Basically try to hide. They won't even acknowledge that our problems come from greed, concentrated power, and exploitation. It's always a technical problem rather than a power imbalance. By framing it like this, they convince people to not care about government. Truly dangerous. By dipping out, expecting more from government, the solutions become private. Instead of dealing with crime in your neighborhood, hire a security guard. Instead of wanting better from your public schools, send your kid to a private one. Not everyone has the capacity to do those things. And in their privatization, whether it be corporate or nonprofit, they convince people to stop engaging with government, which reduces the innovation in how people engage, which is needed. We can't keep approaching government like we did in the 1800s, the 1900s, to modernize. So, in stopping our innovation, undermine our political voice and commitments to voicing our concerns in the first place. Without voicing our concerns, our democracy fails. Creating change in democracy requires people to care, to be involved, to demand better. They redefine civil society as a space where they can circumvent state and citizen claims to resources. Instead of democratic solutions, they need private institutions to solve these problems. They treat people as clients or customers rather than citizens who deserve to have a voice. That allows them to ignore real problems that emerge, the way they solve our issues. It weakens us over time. Real change The fairness that all citizens deserve, that public good requires, can only be achieved when we stand together, use our political voice. Exiting civil society, stopping caring about politics, worsens our situation, only makes them more powerful. Like someone who hasn't spoken for days struggle the next time they need to interact, speak out loud. This privatization and called neoliberal assault on democratic government, democracy, creates an opportunity to renew what we deserve. But that's if we can put aside distractions like social entrepreneurship, enterprise, come together, educate, organize, and agitate towards demanding government listen to us and not corporations. Summary: Social Enterprise, Not Social Change by Marshall Ganz, Tamara Kay, Jason Spicer, an article published in 2018, Standford Social Innovation Review, spring 2018, pages 59-60. Thank you.